Hi, everyone. I'm Andy Harrington, and I'm the Executive Director of the Canadian Foodgrains Bank.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kenneth Kim, and I'm the Acting Executive Director for World Renew.
And this is Get to Know Your Canadian Foodgrains Bank member. Ken, great to have you with us. I also get the privilege of working with you as the chair at Canadian Foodgrains Bank, so you and I get to chat. But this is a really good chance for you to tell us a little bit about the work of World Renew. So tell us what World Renew does.
Thanks, Andy. I mean, I think all of us that are in similar ministries want to do our best as God's people, and very similar to the Canadian Foodgrains Bank. In terms of the fundamentals of who we are, we envision a world where we see people experiencing and extending Christ's compassion and living together in the hope as God's community. And our mission is simply that our passion for justice and mercy calls us to unite with other communities around the world. And we want to renew hope, reconcile lives, and restore creation. And bottom line, it goes down to that Micah 6:8 verse that we all love, right? Doing justice, loving mercy. And for us, and for our tagline, we say serving Christ, right? That's our walking humbly with God. And so we try to live that out. It's a fantastic expression of God's love for the creation. In the Christian Reformed tradition, deacons have an amazing role as very active people who carry out ministry, not always with words, but with deed. And so for 60 years, we've been at it, and we're celebrating our 60th anniversary this year. So it's been a fabulous year to see the joy and the celebration, and also recognize the achievements that we've had, where it used to be all folks from Canada and the United States going out and staffing these offices that we have in our 26 countries where we remain very active. And now seeing that we have national staff who've risen up to the ranks of being country directors and even regional directors for World Renew, where they're coming from the regions themselves. So even the face of World Renew in terms of who we are has turned from the origin of how we started to the new vision that we have. That's part of our growing history and growing reality.
It's a wonderful thing when I think about that 60 years of history and how it started and how you're becoming so much more the face of the local people that you actually work with. It's a beautiful way in which you talk about God's creation and the way in which we're all part of it there. And I know that you've had a lot of experience both at World Renew and elsewhere, but tell us about how that's impacted you personally. Tell us about maybe a visit that you've made somewhere that really sort of lives in your memory.
I think some of my most memorable visits have been to places where you can see, you can feel, and you can even smell sometimes the level of hunger. And yet, when you go to those distributions, the sense of hope in people's eyes, it's incredible, right? The stories, the number of stories that have been countless, but people walking, hours to get there. And you ask them, what did they have? I had a little bit of tea. Why did you not eat today? It wasn't always about that they didn't have food. It's just that they prioritized the needs of their children first. They said, the food's for my children. I knew that I'd be walking here, and I knew that the joy of knowing what was here was enough to sustain me coming. And when you go to our distributions almost anywhere around the world, and I've seen them in every continent where we've worked, when they distribute beans or rice or grains and something falls to the ground, you see somebody else immediately picking that grain up. Why? It is so precious. And it is that level of care, the sense of order, the sense of ensuring that everybody who's on that list, everybody who has been vetted can get the resources that were designated for them. I mean, that's just, it's immeasurable, the kind of impact it leaves one. And yeah, I've been privileged to see quite a bit of that. Unfortunately, in places, that when this is over, can we provide it again? Yeah. And then I go back to places like Lebanon, where I've been to many times as well, where yes, by by the amazing grace of God, we have managed to continue our programs. And so World Renew has been there almost since the beginning of the conflict with the number of refugees who are coming in from Syria and from other areas that were forced out of Syria because of the conflict. And right now, Lebanon's in deep chaos, and yet we have somehow managed to maintain our level of support for our partner on the ground. And now we are not just feeding Syrians and others who are displaced, but also Lebanese who have been deeply impacted by the crisis ongoing in their country. So we can't feed everybody, and
No.
that saddens me. We can't do that, but we're sharing all our resources. It's not about keeping anything for ourselves. We are sharing all our resources.
You know, it's a true and honest phrase that we can't feed everybody in a world at the moment where we're looking at up to 828 million people in acute to severe hunger. That's hard for people like you and I. And I think some of our supporters as well to think we wish we could do it all. It's those people that are left out. But I love the way you talk about hope there, Ken. And when I think of hope, I think of the hope that Scripture gives us as well. And you've already mentioned Micah 6:8, such a, do justice, love mercy, walk humbly with God. But what are verses, when you think about hunger, when you think about that hope in the midst of despair, what are verses that come to your mind? What are the ones that inspire you and push you forward?
Well, I'm not. I guess the verse would be when Christ told his disciples, "Feed my people,"
Yeah.
and he said that as the disciples looked around the hills where they were at that time. The disciples were tired, so were all the people on the hillsides who were just waiting to hear something from Jesus Christ. And the disciples wanted to send them away, right? Saying, "We've got nothing here. We got 5 loaves and 2 fishes, and how are we supposed to feed this massive number of people?" And Christ simply said, "Feed my people." And what it's a command, and I suppose we can all think that, well, it's Jesus Christ, of course, he's miraculous. Well, actually, the miracle was in passing those baskets around, and what started as the 5 loaves of bread and 2 fishes ended up at 12 overflowing baskets, and that's after they fed the 5,000, and that doesn't include the women and children, because in those days they didn't count women and
Yeah.
children. I don't know, maybe. And simply put, we know the world produces enough food. What's
Mm-hmm.
wrong with our system that we can't share that bounty with everybody? And part of it is selfishness, and part of it is just territoriality. We got wars going on. A lot of times it's about the money, and it's about the fact that somebody wants to get rich, and they don't care if somebody goes hungry. But at the end of the day, we don't make judgments as to necessarily why these people are hungry at this point. Yeah, we do work on those things long term, and Foodgrains Bank does amazing work in terms of the advocacy with all its members on some of these key issues, fighting long term hunger. But at the same time, we can do something now. And I think it was Mother Teresa who said, if you can't feed 100, just feed one. Okay,
Yeah.
well, let's start, right? So we know that
Right.
as Canadians, we can't feed the entire world. And Canada, well, for a country our size, we make a nice little dent in the overall global food assistance basket. And then churches have a little part in that too, and that's where we fit in. And be it World Renew, be it all the other members of the Foodgrains Bank, we do our part. There's no judgment that, oh, wow, that member gives 10 times as much as this member, so one's greater than the other. That's never about that. It's about doing our part. And so if we've got the resources, we want to make sure we can use them well. And for me, it all goes back to feed my people. And that commandment is equally important to love your neighbors. And so if my neighbor is hungry, then it's time to feed my neighbor, right?
That's such an important verse at the moment, at a time when we're all going through, economic disruptions and we're all feeling the pinch. We've got to recognize that there are some people, when we talk about the levels of hunger that we're talking about, that are on a totally different level from what we talk about here in Canada and elsewhere. And so when you think of Jesus saying, feed my people, there is a global command there, but there's a real emphasis that through Scripture on the widow, the poor, the refugee, and the orphan. And I'm so aware of what World Renew does around that. So as you think about the work of World Renew, what are you most excited about now? As you stare into the future, even in the midst of this global hunger crisis we're in, what are you most excited about now?
Yeah, I appreciate the fact that the roots, our grassroots support for World Renew simply incorporates the grassroots support that our people have for the work of the Foodgrains Bank. And so they do see what we do synonymously with the work of Foodgrains Bank and the work of Foodgrains Bank synonymously as part of World Renew. And I think that's it goes back to the farming roots of many Dutch immigrants who've come to Canada. On the other hand, it's also about that gift of multiplication, knowing that if they put it in that basket, it might be multiplied at Foodgrains Bank, and that's a beautiful story. That's there in the feeding of the 5,000 that we've been talking about a little bit. What's exciting, I see a new crop of leaders coming up within the organization. That's been very positive. I see us talking about things like shifting power, decolonizing, and sometimes these things are challenging words to consider. It means giving up the kind of authority that we've always enjoyed, or perhaps never knew that we were the only ones enjoying it, and then requires us to be conscientious about the exercise of power. That it shouldn't just be us determining and dictating what the terms of engagement are. So while World Renew remains steadfast in our love and support, I think we're going to see a shift towards greater autonomy, responsibility by our local offices in the different countries, those who understand the context really well. Our work in the home base is to continue praying for them, providing material support as we're able, yes, and some technical assistance. But a lot of the knowledge is already there. They're already sharing it amongst themselves, and I think many of the shifts that we've seen in Foodgrains Bank in terms of how it's grown with its programs through its members reflect this reality that there's been maturity within our organizations on how we can go about doing our work together and do it well and uphold our Christian principles. And it's not about, none of us are messiahs here. We're all workers, right? We're all supposed to do our part and recognize that sometimes we follow, sometimes we lead, but we must all do that out of a deep commitment towards service.
I'm so glad you mentioned that. One of the biggest things we're thinking about across our network, and so by that I mean our members, our partners, the staff at Foodgrains Bank, is this whole process, and it's a technical word that gets used a lot, about localization, and really thinking through this kind of aid structure that we have at the moment that comes from a kind of a top-down thinking to really understanding that the people we're working with, our partners, actually know so much more than we do, and giving them the agency and ability, or allowing them to have the say in things that they should have all the way through. I think that's such a wise way of approaching it, and I do know that World Renew is right at the forefront of that. And you've kind of touched on this already, Ken, but final question for you: what do you like most about being a member of Foodgrains Bank? I mean, you've said some good things already, so you might want to kind of restate them. I don't know.
Maybe there's something. Maybe you're asking the wrong person as the board chair of Foodgrains Bank, and the reason why I love being board chair is that I get to represent some of the best of the Foodgrains Bank, right? So you get these 15 members, some large, some small. And occasionally we bicker about a few things. But at the end of the day, there's an amazing amount of love that's there for the work of the Foodgrains Bank. And that's the overall sense of ownership that churches are a part of in this great endeavor called the Canadian Foodgrains Bank. It is unique in the sense that it's ecumenical collaboration, and there's ecumenical collaboration that happens in many places. But this is at a scale and with a level of focus that I think is quite unique to Canada and the work of the Foodgrains Bank, and that's something that we need to cherish. It's not something that we need to just own ourselves. I mean, we need to share that with others. And while officially and legally the ownership may be with the 15 member agencies or member houses, we got to remember that our support comes from the grassroots, from the rural areas of Canada that decided to save a part of that harvest, which was in excess, and then ship it over. And then we figured it out over time. Well, maybe shipping it out isn't such a great idea. We can actually acquire those resources faster and supporting the local economy in these countries. There's been a development within Foodgrains Bank that's been phenomenal. I've seen its growth from both in terms of staff and also just in terms of scale of resources that now flow through Foodgrains Bank. And I've been deeply privileged to be a part of that for a couple of decades, I'm afraid to say now, but yeah. And just like we had a turning of the chapter when we said goodbye to Jim Cornelius, our longstanding executive director, but then we got the opportunity to invite Andy Harrington in for the role. And
A
these
privilege that
tables,
is.
the tables, the faces around the tables may change, but what I'm deeply grateful for is the commitment that our churches, and there are a lot of nameless people, will continue to pray and support generously the work of World Renew as a part of the work of Canadian Foodgrains Bank.
That's wonderful. Interesting you say about bickering, because those of us, it's as we're filming this, it's close to Thanksgiving, and I'm sure there was some bickering going around over tables because we're family, and that's the beauty of this, that we come together and we unite with unbreakable bonds, and being in some of those board meetings, being in some meetings with members, there is this sense of family that we're in this together that I have rarely experienced in my 36 years in working in Christian ministry, actually. So, Ken, thank you so much for your time today. I think you've outlined World Renew well, and also Foodgrains Bank and its relationships with you well. And so excited to see some of those things you're talking about over the next few years coming to fruition. So thanks for your time, Ken. It's much appreciated.
Hey, thanks, Andy. Great working with you.
You too.